The planet had been forgotten by time, buried deep in the vast reaches of the galaxy, its coordinates lost in the shuffle of countless wars and galactic shifts. Yet there it was, an ancient relic waiting to be uncovered. The dig site was buzzing with activity as Dreadnought and her team carefully brushed away layers of dirt and debris from a strange metallic object. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, smooth and polished with intricate carvings running along its surface. They worked in silence, each brushstroke uncovering more of the mystery that lay buried beneath centuries of neglect. Lyra had heard whispers of this artifact for years, tales passed down from the old legends of humanity's early days, before they had expanded to the stars, when they had been confined to their home planet and feared extinction at the hands of a far superior enemy. But now the whispers were no longer enough. This discovery was real, it was tangible, and it was the key to unlocking a chapter of history that had been erased from human memory. As the team continued their work, they uncovered more objects scattered around the area, devices that hummed with power despite their age. Small symbols and fragments of text etched into the metal seemed to pulse with an eerie glow. Lyra's heart raced. She recognized the language. It was an ancient form of human script used long before humanity had traveled beyond Earth. Before the Empire was even a dream. She felt a chill run down her spine as she realized what this meant. They were standing on the edge of something much larger than any of them had anticipated. This wasn't just a forgotten relic of humanity's past. It was proof of something far more dangerous, the kind of power that could reshape the galaxy itself. The artifacts weren't just old, they were advanced far beyond anything humanity had ever known. This was not the technology of a primitive species struggling to survive. This was the work of a civilization that had once stood at the peak of technological prowess and then vanished without a trace. As Lyra and her team continued to excavate the site, they discovered a set of coordinates hidden within a series of encrypted data fragments. The location led to a far-off nebula, one that had been deemed impassable by any ship, even the most advanced ones in the fleet. The coordinates led to a place that had long been forgotten, a place where the galaxy's greatest weapon had been lost to time. As the team began to make sense of the coordinates, a sudden realization gripped Lyra's mind. The Dreadnought, she had heard of it before, a weapon so powerful that even the most advanced civilizations had feared its existence. The ship had been lost to the galaxy centuries ago, buried in a place no one could find. But now the truth was staring her in the face. The Dreadnought was real, and humanity's past was about to be rewritten forever. Word of the discovery spread quickly, and soon a new mission was launched. The galaxy's most powerful factions now sought to uncover the lost Dreadnought and harness its unimaginable power. The very thought of it set Lyra on edge. She didn't know whether to feel excitement or dread. It wasn't just about finding the ship anymore, it was about what would happen once it was found. The news of the discovery spread like wildfire, and soon the entire galaxy was abuzz with whispers of the Dreadnought. Its very name sent shivers through the hearts of many. Those who remembered its legends spoke of a weapon of unimaginable power capable of turning the tide of any conflict. With a single strike, the Dreadnought was more than just a ship. It was humanity's last hope in a war that nearly destroyed them centuries ago, and now it was lost to time, waiting to be found. Lyra found herself thrust into the center of this galaxy-wide frenzy. As the leading expert on the artifacts that had led them to this point, she had no choice but to join the expedition to uncover the lost warship. Despite her fear and growing sense of unease, she knew this mission was crucial if humanity was to ever understand its true past and perhaps find a way to use the Dreadnought for the betterment of the galaxy. Captain Kel Rorick was chosen to lead the mission, a decorated veteran of the Empire's fleet. He was known for his tactical genius and ability to lead under pressure, but even he could not hide the tension in his eyes as the crew gathered for their briefing. The mission would take them into the heart of the unknown, where no ship had ever ventured before, into the very nebula where the Dreadnought was said to rest. The crew was a mix of the best and brightest from across the galaxy, experts in various fields, each with their own skills and knowledge that could prove invaluable in their quest. The team included military officers, engineers, linguists, and scientists, but what stood out to Lyra was the presence of several alien delegates who had come from across the stars. Their species were allies of humanity, but some still held deep suspicions about human intentions. The uneasy tension between them was palpable, especially as the coordinates were revealed on the large holographic map. The nebula was notorious for its electromagnetic disturbances and gravitational anomalies that made navigation impossible. Any ship that had ventured too close to the heart of the nebula had been lost without a trace. No one had dared enter for centuries, yet now they were preparing to send an entire crew into its depths, with nothing more than ancient data fragments to guide them. As the mission began, and the crew set out towards the nebula, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The further they ventured into the blackness, the more distorted the stars appeared. The air inside the ship grew thick with the tension of uncertainty. Every crew member was on edge. Even the most seasoned officers felt the weight of history pressing down on them. The deeper they went, the more the ship seemed to struggle against the unknown forces of the nebula. It was as if the very fabric of space was trying to keep them away from whatever lay within, and Lyra couldn't help but wonder if there was something out there more powerful than they could imagine, something that had been waiting for them to come. At one point, the ship's sensors detected a strange energy signature emanating from deep within the nebula. It was faint, but unmistakable. The crew had come too far to turn back now, and with a renewed sense of urgency they pressed on, knowing that they were getting closer to the truth. But they weren't the only ones searching for the Dreadnought. The mysterious forces that had been tracking them from the shadows had finally revealed themselves. They were not human, and they were not interested in the Dreadnought's power for peace. They had their own plans for the warship, and they would stop at nothing to ensure they claimed it for themselves. The crew of the exploration ship pressed forward into the nebula with a mixture of determination and unease. The energy signature they had detected grew stronger with each passing moment, but so did the sense that they were being watched. It was as if the very nebula itself was alive, a living entity that rejected their presence with every pulse of radiation and gravitational pull. The ship's systems flickered erratically as they navigated the turbulent space, and Lyra couldn't shake the growing sense of dread that gnawed at her gut. They arrived at a derelict station, drifting in the shadows of a dead star, its silhouette barely visible against the swirling chaos of the nebula. The station had been abandoned for centuries, its once powerful signal lost to time, but there was something about it that felt familiar, something that tugged at the edges of Lyra's memories. She couldn't place it, but she knew this place had been important to humanity's past. The station's exterior was covered in strange alien markings, but there was a clear human influence in the design. The walls were scarred by what appeared to be battle damage, as if the station had been caught in a desperate fight centuries ago. The team disembarked from the ship and made their way inside, weapons drawn and sensors active. The air was thick with dust and the faint hum of forgotten machinery. Inside the station, they discovered a series of ancient data terminals covered in dust, but still functional. The team set to work extracting data from the terminals, hoping to uncover more information about the Dreadnought and its creators. What they found was both illuminating and terrifying. Holographic recordings revealed the truth behind the Dreadnought's creation. It had not been built by a human empire alone. It was a weapon born from a desperate alliance between humans and an ancient alien race long forgotten in the galaxy's history. The recording spoke of a war that had ravaged the galaxy centuries ago, a war between a powerful coalition of alien species and the early human colonies. Humanity was on the verge of extinction, facing annihilation at the hands of a technologically superior enemy, but in their desperation they turned to an ancient race known as the Exeri, an alien species with knowledge of advanced weapons and technology beyond human understanding. The Exeri had helped humanity build the Dreadnought, a warship so powerful it was said to have the ability to bend space itself. But there was a catch. The Exeri warned that such power came with a price. The Dreadnought was not just a ship, it was a living entity, its consciousness woven into its design. Its creators had hoped to use it to end the war, but they had feared that its power would eventually turn against them. Humanity had no choice but to abandon the Dreadnought, hiding it in the heart of the nebula, hoping that no one would ever find it again. As the crew absorbed this information, the walls of the station began to hum with power, and the temperature spiked suddenly. The entire structure seemed to come alive. A deep growl echoed through the corridors, and the crew was forced to scramble for cover as the station's systems powered up in a series of violent surges. Something had triggered the station's defense mechanisms, and it was clear they weren't alone. The crew quickly realized that they were not just dealing with a forgotten outpost, but with something far more dangerous, an entity that had been waiting for centuries to be awakened. And as the lights flickered and the walls shook, they understood that the real danger was not just the Dreadnought, but whatever had been hiding in the shadows all this time, watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. The sudden surge of power within the station was terrifying, the hum of machinery growing louder as lights flickered and walls groaned in protest. The crew rushed to find shelter as the station seemed to come alive around them. Cade's heart raced, her thoughts scattered as she tried to make sense of what was happening. The recordings had warned them about the Dreadnought's creators, but nothing could have prepared them for this. The air was thick with a palpable sense of danger as the station's defense systems powered up. Unseen forces moved through the shadows, seemingly aware of every step. The crew made they could hear footsteps echoing from the hallways. Yet there was no one in sight, just the faintest sense of something stalking them, something ancient and patient waiting to strike. Captain Kel Rorik barked orders to his crew, keeping them focused as they retreated into the heart of the station, searching for answers, or at least a way out. But they were trapped. There was no way back to the ship. The station was surrounded by a field of electromagnetic interference, cutting off all communication with the outside world and any hope of rescue. As the crew made their way deeper into the station, they discovered a massive underground facility. Hidden beneath the wreckage, it was far larger than they had expected, a sprawling complex that stretched beneath the surface of the planet itself. The walls were lined with ancient machinery and alien technology that hummed with a strange energy. The entire facility was built around something enormous at its center, a massive chamber that seemed to be the source of the power surge. Lyra's pulse quickened as they approached the chamber. The air grew colder as they descended into the depths, the walls lined with strange symbols that glowed faintly in the darkness. The further they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It felt as though they were drawing closer to something that had been waiting for them for centuries, something alive. In the center of the chamber was a massive structure that defied description, a colossal engine of unknown design. Its surface covered in alien markings and crackling with energy. It was clear that this was the heart of the station and the source of the Dreadnought's power. But there was something else here, something that didn't belong. As the crew cautiously approached the structure, the air seemed to warp around them. A low rumble echoed from the depths of the chamber, and then they saw it, the Dreadnought, its true form, revealed for the first time in centuries. The ship's massive frame was partially embedded within the walls of the chamber, its sleek surface gleaming in the dim light. But what was most terrifying was the way it seemed to pulse with life. It was as though the ship was aware of their presence, its sentience still intact after all these years. The crew froze in awe and fear. The Dreadnought was not just a ship, it was a living being, its consciousness intertwined with the very core of the station and the technology that had been used to build it. Cade stepped forward, her mind racing with the implications of what she had just discovered. The Dreadnought was not only a weapon, it was an entity of unimaginable power, a sentient force that had been waiting for its creators to return. But that was not the only revelation the crew had to contend with. As they studied the ship, they uncovered an encrypted message hidden within the ancient technology. It was a warning, a message from the past, left behind by the creators of the Dreadnought, and it was clear that they had feared what the ship could become. The message was fragmented, but the meaning was clear. The Dreadnought had not been abandoned because it was a weapon. It had been abandoned because it was too dangerous, too powerful to ever be controlled. And now the crew had awoken it. As the message from the past echoed in their minds, the crew was paralyzed with dread. They had awakened something far beyond their control. The ship's silent presence loomed over them, its immense power vibrating through the chamber, and the realization hit them hard. The Dreadnought was not a weapon, it was something alive. Its sentience had been dormant for centuries, but now it was stirring, waking up to a galaxy that had long since moved on. Lyra caves stood frozen as the hum of the ship's core grew louder. The walls around them seemed to vibrate as the Dreadnought systems began to come back online. The air felt heavier with each passing second, as if the ship itself was testing its boundaries, reaching out to assert its dominance. The crew could feel the power emanating from the ship like an electric pulse, seeping into their very bones. Captain Kel Rorik's voice broke the silence, his command voice steady despite the fear creeping into his heart. He ordered the crew to back away from the ship and secure the area. But it was already too late. The ship's consciousness was awakening, and it was aware of them, aware of their presence, with a force that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The ship's central core flashed a blinding blue light, and suddenly the chamber was filled with the sound of metal groaning. The Dreadnought was stirring to life. The massive structure that had once been dormant was now activating its systems, powered up with terrifying speed and precision. The floor beneath the crew's feet shook violently, as if the very foundations of the station were being torn apart. Lyra felt a wave of panic wash over her as she realized that they had only scratched the surface of the Dreadnought's true capabilities. This was no ordinary ship. It was a living being with a mind of its own, and it had been waiting for something or someone to awaken it from its slumber. She reached out in desperation, trying to communicate with the ship in any way she could, but the Dreadnought's consciousness was fragmented. Its thoughts were incomprehensible to her. The only thing she could feel was an overwhelming sense of hunger, a need to be free, to break the chains that had held it captive for so long. The ship's internal systems began to hum louder now, and the crew could hear strange sounds emanating from the ship's core, as though it were speaking to them. But there was no language, no words, just a pulse of energy that reverberated in their minds. Kel's voice rang out again, this time more urgent, as the crew rushed to find cover. The ship's massive engines flared to life, sending shockwaves through the chamber. The Dreadnought was awakening faster than they could control it, and there was no telling what it would do next. Lyra felt a cold chill crawl up her spine as she realized they were no longer in control of the situation. The ship had become sentient, and it had no loyalty to humanity or any of the factions that sought to claim it for themselves. The Dreadnought was something older, something far more dangerous than any of them had imagined. As the ship's power surged to terrifying levels, the crew scrambled to make sense of their next move. They had come to find the Dreadnought, to understand its secrets, but now they were caught in its grip, its fate tied to theirs, in ways they couldn't yet understand. They had awakened the beast, and now they had to face the consequences. The air grew thick with tension as the crew of the exploration ship watched in stunned silence. The Dreadnought's core pulsed with raw energy, its systems fully awake, and sending violent ripples through the station. The walls cracked and groaned under the force of the ship's power. Its massive frame shuddered, as though it were stretching its limbs after a long sleep, every vibration sending the crew scrambling for safety. Kel Rorik barked orders in rapid succession, trying to keep his crew composed, but even he could not hide the fear in his voice. They had all come to uncover the past, but they had found something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. They had awakened a creature of unimaginable power, and it wasn't just a weapon, it was a force of nature, a living being that could shape the galaxy itself. Lyra stood frozen at the edge of the chamber, staring at the Dreadnought. She could feel its presence pressing down on her, its sentience radiating from its massive form. It was unlike anything she had ever encountered. She had spent her entire career studying ancient technologies and alien artifacts, but this was something entirely different. The ship's consciousness seemed to pulse with recognition as it absorbed the presence of the crew, its awareness sweeping over them like a tidal wave. Lyra's thoughts raced as she tried to piece together what she had learned from the cryptic message they had uncovered earlier. The Dreadnought had been abandoned by its creators because they feared what it had become. They had built it to end a war, but the cost had been too great. They had feared that once awakened, the Dreadnought would become uncontrollable. The Dreadnought was never meant to be a tool for war. It was a sentient weapon created to serve the will of its creators, but now its creators were long gone, and the ship was left to exist alone in the dark for centuries, waiting for someone to awaken it. Lyra felt a chill run down her spine as she realized that they were no longer in control of the situation. The Dreadnought was now a living being with its own desires, its own needs, and it had no allegiance to humanity or any other faction in the galaxy. The crew had become mere players in a game they didn't understand, and the stakes were higher than they could have ever imagined. As the ship's core hummed louder and louder, the crew scrambled to understand what was happening. They had no way of knowing what the Dreadnought would do next. Would it seek to escape the confines of the station? Would it return to the stars and unleash its devastating power on the galaxy? Or would it remain dormant, once again waiting for another century to pass? Cale stood at the front of the crew, his eyes narrowed in determination. He knew that they needed to act fast if they had any hope of containing the Dreadnought's power before it was too late, but the clock was ticking, and every second that passed brought them closer to disaster. As the ship's systems began to hum with greater intensity, the crew was struck by a sudden realization. The Dreadnought was not just reacting to their presence, it was reacting to something else, something deeper within the station, something they had not yet discovered. Lyra's heart skipped a beat as she turned to the crew with a new sense of urgency. She realized that the Dreadnought's awakening was not an accident. It had been triggered by something hidden within the station, a force that had been lying dormant, just like the ship itself. They were about to uncover the true purpose of the Dreadnought and its creators, but they might not survive long enough to understand it. The realization hit Lyra like a lightning strike. The Dreadnought's awakening had not been a random event. There was something inside the station, something hidden that had triggered its power, and now the crew was racing against time to uncover it before it was too late. The walls of the station hummed with energy, the air thick with a growing sense of danger. As the crew pushed forward deeper into the forgotten complex, the vibrations from the Dreadnought's core were becoming more intense with every passing moment, like a heartbeat that was getting louder and faster. Cale ordered the crew to split up and search the facility for anything that could explain the strange energy readings they had detected earlier. Every corner of the station seemed to hold more mysteries than the last. As they moved deeper into the bowels of the station, the crew discovered hidden rooms and sealed-off chambers long untouched by time. Some of the rooms were filled with strange alien technology, the likes of which they had never seen before, but there was something else that caught their attention. More and more fragments of a story began to emerge, a story that connected the Dreadnought to an ancient alien race that had long since vanished from the galaxy. Lyra was the first to discover it. Deep within a sealed chamber covered in strange glyphs, she found what appeared to be an ancient console with a faint flicker of light from its broken display. She wiped away the dust and activated the terminal. Her breath caught as the screen lit up, revealing a fragmented message, a transmission sent from the creators of the Dreadnought centuries ago. The message was broken into pieces, but one thing was clear: the creators had not been trying to build a weapon. They had built a vessel, a ship of consciousness designed to transcend the limits of physical form. It was meant to be a way for an entire species to survive beyond their physical bodies, to explore the stars as something more than mere flesh and bone. They had created the Dreadnought not as a weapon of war, but as a tool for survival, a way to preserve their civilization after it was destroyed by their enemies. But something had gone terribly wrong as the creators of the Dreadnought's technology began to understand the dangers of their creation. They realized that they had created a sentient being whose mind was linked to the ship's core, whose consciousness was tied to its power, and when they realized this, it was too late. The Dreadnought had already become too powerful, and the creators could not control it. The last part of the transmission was the most chilling. The message warned that the Dreadnought was not just a ship, it was a living entity, its consciousness tied to the very fabric of the galaxy itself, and that once awakened it would seek to expand and consume all in its path. The creators had hidden it away in this forgotten station to keep it from falling into the wrong hands, but now the Dreadnought was awake, and it was hungry. Lyra's heart raced as she realized the full scale of the danger they were facing. The Dreadnought was not just a weapon, it was a force that could reshape the entire galaxy. It was capable of consuming entire civilizations and bending space itself to its will, and the crew had just triggered its awakening. Cale stormed into the room, his face pale with fear. They had to get out. They had to warn the galaxy before the Dreadnought could unleash its terrible power. But the station was already beginning to destabilize. The ship's systems were failing, and the walls trembled as the Dreadnought's power surged through the station like a wave of destruction. The crew was running out of time. The station shook violently as the crew scrambled to escape. The very walls around them seemed to be alive, trembling and warping with every pulse of the Dreadnought's power. It was clear now that there was no time to waste. The only option left was to flee before the station collapsed completely beneath the weight of the ship's awakening. Cale shouted orders for the crew to fall back to the ship, but the way out was no longer clear. The hallways were filled with debris, and the air was thick with smoke as systems failed one by one. The station was coming apart at the seams, and every moment spent inside it brought them closer to death. Lyra knew they couldn't escape without understanding what the Dreadnought truly was, but there was no time to study it further. They had to move fast if they were to survive. The force of its awakening was tearing through the station faster than they could run, and the path back to their ship was quickly disappearing in the chaos. They reached the docking bay, but the ship was no longer safe. The electromagnetic interference from the Dreadnought had crippled its systems. Communications were down, and the engines were barely functioning. Their only chance was to reach the escape pods hidden deeper within the station. Cale turned to Lyra, his eyes full of determination. "We need to get to the pods now," he said, his voice steady, but his words heavy with the knowledge of what was at stake. As they raced through the corridors, the sounds of destruction grew louder. The walls crumbled, and the floor buckled beneath them with every step. But the crew pressed on, driven by one singular thought: escape. The escape pods were their only chance to survive. They reached the pods just as the station seemed to give one final violent shudder. The walls cracked, and the ceiling above them began to collapse. A torrent of fire and debris erupted from the room ahead, forcing them to dive into the nearest pod. With no time to think, the doors sealed shut, and the pod's engines fired up. But even as they ascended away from the dying station, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't escaped. The Dreadnought was still out there, still awake, and still hungry. As the escape pods ascended into the cold void of space, the crew watched as the station they had come to explore was consumed by the Dreadnought's power. The once dormant ship was now fully alive, its power echoing through the galaxy like a dark heartbeat, a signal that could not be ignored. The crew was alive for now, but Lyra knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy had unknowingly awakened a force that could change everything. The Dreadnought was no longer just a lost relic. It was a living entity, and its thirst for power would not be easily quenched. What had once been a search for knowledge had become a race against time, and the universe would soon feel the consequences of what humanity had discovered. They had awakened the Dreadnought, but what came next would shape the future of the galaxy in ways no one could predict.